In the end, Europe did turn out to vote, voters rattling the form, not always as predicted. The highest participation in an EU election for 25 years, pushing the two mainstream center-right and center-left blocs below 50% of the vote. That's a first. They're still the top two vote-getters across the continent, but the momentum's definitely with either those who want a lot more Europe or those who want a lot less. With Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin at times gunning for the EU and its institutions, it's all about who now calls the shots in Brussels. And picking new European commissioners and a new boss of the European Central Bank, well, it's also about the EU's next 7-year budget, deciding on security, immigration, energy transition. How does the higher turnout impact domestic policy among the 28? Already, Greece's prime minister has had to call a snap election. What about France, Germany, Spain, Italy, and the UK, which wasn't even supposed to vote, turn out higher there, with a result, alas, that leaves that bitter divide over Brexit more than ever unresolved. More broadly, does a more energized EU mean a more polarized EU? Today in the France 24 debate, we're wondering whose Europe it will be going forward. With us, John Henley, who's the European Affairs correspondent for British newspaper The Guardian. How are you, sir?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you.
Also joining us, Jean Messiha, national delegate for Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party.
Hi, how are you doing?
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Welcome to former Italian Member of Parliament Sandro Gozzi, candidate for Emmanuel Macron's list here in France, Renaissance. I say candidate because you're elected if
Brexit happens by the 31st of October.
So
I'm one of the 5 frozen MEP.
So you're rooting for Brexit?
I was already rooting for Brexit before. Now I got, of course, a vested interest, but I thought that the best way to respect the democratic decision now is that the UK goes. Then, in the future, they might decide to rejoin. That would be the best way to respect the democratic will of the people.
All right, we'll revisit that point. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. On Sunday, it may have seemed like 28 national races. Now it's Monday, and it's all about building a majority. The EPP losing 41 seats, the Social Democrats 45 seats, the Liberal Democrats would surge. That's the group that's in purple there, ALDI, and would surge thanks to Macron's 21 seats. The Greens are on plus 19. And you see there that it's a very different, a more fragmented EU Parliament. There's going to be an informal EU summit on Tuesday in Brussels, and already the horse trading has begun. Were you surprised by these results, John Henley?
No, they were pretty largely signalled. I think the surprise, the only real surprise, was the scale of the Greens' advance. Pretty much everything else was within the kind of margins of errors of most of the national polling companies. And what it means, as you said, is that the two main centre-right, centre-left blocs, which represent parties, the big, conservative and social democrat parties that have traditionally governed most of Europe pretty much since the end of the Second World War. As you said, they've lost their majority. They're going to have to look for new coalitions and new majorities, and that's likely to really bring the Liberals into play and probably also the Greens.
So it's going to be coalition building. We're not, in France, we're not good at this kind of exercise. Is it going to be like Germany where they're going to first decide what the platform is before they agree on who gets to be in it?
Well, it's clearly a matter of politics and not of numbers, and it's a matter of refounding a new majority that we want to refound around our political priorities for Europe and not enlarging a majority which has failed. Because after all, the two big losers of these elections are the Social Democrats and the EPP. And there is a new element, a new group in town, that the group we are going to create, which is going to be decisive for any new majority. But we want to start from a commitment on policy priorities, ecological transition, fight against inequalities, rule of law. These are the political priorities around which we are going to negotiate with the groups which share a pro-European agenda.
Is there a path, Jean Messiha, for the likes of your group, Matteo Salvini, etc., to to build a coalition?
Yeah, let me just comment on your scheme you show on TV a minute ago about, this new European Parliament. I think you are plated the reality of the vote to the existing group, while what is happening right now is just negotiations to create new groups. So it's not possible to understand the new reality of the European Parliament through the existing group which are going to disappear, many of them in the next coming days. So this do not show exactly what will happen.
So there is change right now.
Yeah, there is change. We have initiated negotiations with all our allies. I don't think, for example, when you say that Viktor Orban in Hungary will not be ours, etc.
Because right now, just to explain to our viewers, Orban sits with the EPP, the main center-right bloc. You'd like him to move over to you?
Yes, of course. I don't think that the PPE will keep Viktor Orban, because I agree with what had been said minutes ago. It's about politics, not about numbers. Today, in the European Parliament, we are talking about 170 MPs, sovereignist MPs, who can vote.
170? Hang on.
Yeah, who can vote the same way. It's not about an organic view. It's about a political view. And even more if you add the far left, which also have a composition of sovereignists and which can vote with us on some issues that concern European sovereignty. So the Eurosceptical in the new European Parliament constitute like second or third group in the Parliament. Of course, this cannot be seen throughout the ventilation of the groups, but by the votes, you can understand that the Eurosceptical are very important in the new European Parliament.
Let's call up that graph again, John Henley. You agree?
I think you're absolutely right that there are potentially 170 MEPs in the new Parliament that want, broadly speaking, less EU as opposed to more EU. That's still a minority. You're talking. This is a 750
between a quarter and a third.
This is 150. This is 750 seat parliament.
Yeah.
You're talking 170 MEPs.
But,
and I think what's also I think what's also very important is that those groups disagree on a very large number of things. They agree on less EU, but they disagree on some very fundamental policy issues. There's a big divide between the sort of Le Pen, Salvini camp and the Eastern European Eurosceptics, for example, on their attitude to Vladimir Putin in Russia, whether or not they're pro-Kremlin. There's a big divide on attitudes to migration. Salvini, who we see there, is very keen to have quotas for migrants to distribute them evenly around Europe. Viktor Orban, that's the last thing he wants. There's a big divide too on economic policy. Salvini, Marine Le Pen are very much kind of what they want to bust open EU budgets. They want to increase state spending. The Nordic Eurosceptics, the far-right parties of Denmark and Sweden and Finland, that's the last thing they want. So there's a lot that these parties disagree on. Whether or not they can actually construct a coherent bloc is a really difficult question.
Let me precise that. You are right. But the new thing in the new European Parliament after this election is that the two main parties that govern Europe through the past 25 years have not now an absolute majority that could allow them to govern Europe the way they govern it this past 20 years. And this is a big revolution. So, and you are talking about the European Parliament. It's not a national parliament. The European Parliament, as you know, is a consensual assembly. So you must have the agreement of all the groups. So this agreement will be much more difficult to find with 170 MPs than before. This is the first thing I want to quote. The other thing is that we are talking about strategical issues, the strategical issues regarding, for example, the migration, regarding the unloyal commercial competition with the other part of the world. All these strategic issues, I guess, we could have an agreement with all the groups. Of course, you cannot understand this new European Parliament with the federal software that is applying to Europe till now, because we are building a national Europe, the Europe for nations that exist in the 60s and the 70s, a Europe of cooperation between sovereign states.
So we want to, at this point in time, welcome from Brussels, Monica Frassoni, co-chair of the European Greens, to our discussion. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. First of all, listening to the conversation now, how different is it going to be in Brussels from now on?
Well, I think that I must admit that I'm not very sure it's going to be very different unless there is an acceptance that things have really to change politically and also under a methodological point of view, if you want. What I mean here is that there must be a consciousness that those who had the majority till now, or very often had the majority at European level, both at national but also at the level of the European Parliament and the European Commission, must change at least part of their own policies in order to be able to answer to the willingness of people to change, whether it is by voting green and also whether it is by voting parties that are certainly not in favor or are not in favor of a greater European integration. So I think that unless there is this acceptance that things have to radically change, I believe that it's going to be indeed more difficult, but also not much more positive. And I also think that the question of climate change is going much beyond a green issue. And I think that is also behind the victory in some member states of the Greens.
All right. Of course, it's going to be interesting to see the discussion over whether or not on different issues, different blocs will vote different ways. What's certain is that the first battle that's going to come up is that for European Commission President, perhaps the most powerful job on the strength of sheer numbers. The European People's Party, the center-right bloc, throwing a victory bash in Brussels on Sunday and positioning their leader, Manfred Weber, from the German Bavarian CSU party, to replace Jean-Claude Juncker as the top person at the Commission. The head of the EPP in Parliament, Joseph Daul, saying, "We've won the elections. We ask for only one post, the presidency of the European Commission." Well, for her part, the outgoing EU Competition Commissioner, Margaret Vestager, throwing an olive branch to the leader of the Social Democrats. She, too, is gunning for the top job.
I have worked with breaking monopolies. This is basically what I've been doing for 5 years by now. And this is also what voters have been doing today. The monopoly of power is broken. And this is, of course, why we can do something else. And I very much appreciated what my colleague Frans Timmermans just said, that a coalition can be built of those who want to do something.
Sandro Gozzi, how far will your bloc, the Renaissance bloc, go in defending Vestager's candidacy? Will they go to the point where Emmanuel Macron has to cross swords with the Germans?
I can tell you where we won't go any far in supporting Manfred Weber. Manfred Weber will never be president of the Commission.
Never?
Never be president of the Commission because EPP has lost the election. They have lost almost 40 seats. They got a tiny relative majority, and Manfred Weber is not able at all to build up that large majority in the European Parliament that the new president of the Commission must build. So I think that it is for Manfred Weber is a non-starter, and we have to see which women or men are able to gain a large support in the European Parliament, because it is clear that we need a large majority. The nationalists, it's true that they are in a minority, almost 30%, but we must build up a new political majority, and certainly Manfred Weber is not able to do that. And he has been too ambiguous, and certainly we don't intend to have agreement with the European People's Party, with Viktor Orban also on this issue. Manfred Weber has been too ambiguous. So we put Manfred Weber aside.
But if there's horse trading here, and the Germans say to the French, I'll tell you what, we'll support a French candidate for president of the European Central Bank. You let Weber come in.
This is the horse trading which has kept Europe in the status quo for too long. it is impossible.
And are you sure
it is
Macron won't blink?
impossible.
Are you sure Macron
For me, it is inconceivable to think of a renewal, a European renewal, with this kind of horse trading, and notably with someone like Manfred Weber, President of the European Commission. So I don't think, I'm sure that he will never get our support.
It's most likely, I think, to be someone who isn't even in the running at the moment, because historically, the President of the Commission is basically the person who the lowest number of countries dislike. Okay, and that rather than one of the front runners who comes in and is really pushed by one of the big member states, very often, you know, consensus forms around a candidate that is kind of more or less acceptable to everybody, and that might well mean it's somebody who.
So it's not Margaret Vestager.
Who knows? I mean, I think there's a very high possibility to be someone who we haven't even heard mentioned this far.
Monica Frassoni, who would you like to see get the top job?
You see, I think that the horse trading, as my friend Sandro Gozzi just said, is exactly what we don't have to do now. I believe that the situation, we have two main priorities. One is to take out fundamentally the decision about the President of the Commission from the exclusive hands of the head of states of government. And this is the main reason why we have the leading candidate process. And second is to make sure that we have the best possible candidate for the European Commission President, which is able to implement the best program. And this is what we are not really clear about in this moment. Because if we are only talking about names, we're not really talking about the kind of European Parliament majority we want to build. And personally, and also under a political point of view, Greens have won this election, or have a good result of the election, to do very concrete things. And frankly, except our two leading candidates, we're not very sure that any of the others will be able to implement these proposals before we talk with them. So there is no veto, differently from what my friend Sandro just said, but because we are ready to talk, but because we really want to put at the center this issue of climate change and new jobs and everything. And in this very moment, we're not sure that we share this urgency with anybody. And mind you, I am not saying this because I want to escape from the issue of who will be the favorite and who will be the name that we want. But it's a real political positioning from the part of the Greens. Let's see the card on the table. Let's see on our main issues what are the proposals, and we are ready to talk with everybody.
All right.
This is exactly what I was saying. We don't stand from names. We
I
stand
am
from
not
political
talking about
priorities.
the
There is another
consensual
winner. And another winner is our list Renaissance, who is going to create a new group. We want to start from the policy priorities, not from the names. Certainly, we don't want to start from the name of Manfred Weber.
Okay, that much is clear. We'll be right back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're digesting unprecedented results from European elections that saw, by the way, the highest turnout in a quarter century. We're talking about this energized vote with John Henley, who's the European Affairs correspondent for The Guardian, Jean Messiha, who is national delegate for Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party, Sandro Gozzi, candidate for the Renaissance list, an Italian who's running here in France. How European?
Very European and transnational. Like politics should be in a European democracy.
And Monica Frassoni joins us from Brussels, co-chair of the Greens. Speaking of Italy, Matteo Salvini crushing the competition at home with 34% of the vote. Italy's deputy prime minister positioning himself, well, as the leader of the far right in Europe.
Not only is the League the first party in Italy, but also Marine Le Pen is the first party in France. Nigel Farage is the first party in the UK. Therefore, Italy, France, the UK, it is a sign of a Europe that is changing.
A sign that Europe is changing. But again, we look at the results, Jean Messiha, and we see more votes for like-minded people like you. But at the same time, we're also seeing more votes for those who want more Europe.
Yes, we entered a dynamic. It's a process. You cannot understand it, but a spontaneous generation from one day to the other. I mean, look at what happened in 2017 when Marine Le Pen accessed to the second tour of the presidential election. We have this wave of patriotic and nationalist groups arriving into power, not only in Europe, but also in the world. Look at what happened in the United States with Trump. Look what happened in Brazil with Bolsonaro, in India, and even in Europe. So
haven't you plateaued a little bit? I mean, let's look at the French results here.
Yeah.
Emmanuel Macron made finishings first his party's goal. That didn't happen.
Exactly.
And Marine Le Pen's party, though, if you look, losing in terms of share of the vote when you compare with 2014, and they even lose 2 seats if the UK stays in the EU. They'll finish on even on 23 seats with Renaissance should Brexit happen. So, yes, your party finishes tops, but also there's the question of, and we can see it here, the number of votes. Have you filled up as many votes as you can get? Can you go?
Yes.
Can you get more? At this point in time, it doesn't seem that way.
You are asking the percentage, but if you look at the number of votes, if you look at how many voters voted for us in 2014, the last European election, and the numbers who voted for us in this election, we are almost 600,000 more voters in 2019 for the election, European election, than 2014. So, and also there is a qualitative change, because in 2014 there was no La République En Marche, there was no Macron, as you know.
But where are you going to get more votes? That's the question when you look at the numbers from Sunday night.
Listen, 1 year ago, every spectator and journalist would bury us and say National Rally is dead. Marine Le Pen, after the presidential election, is not politically alive anymore. And as we see in 2019, we are still the first party to arrive in a national ballot. So, just put the things in the context of the 2 past years. You cannot analyze like this in the absolute.
And is the natural leader for Europe's far right Marine Le Pen, or is it Matteo Salvini?
Matteo Salvini is in power in Italy. He is governing. He's a vice prime minister of Italy. And the second time, he is also away from us in the votes for Europe. So he is a natural leader, of course. But number 2 is Marine Le Pen. And as Matteo Salvini said in your report, you have also Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage, it was when 2 years ago, Emmanuel Macron was talking, he drove a fake news, because he said, Nigel Farage just voted for the Brexit and he flew. Once the Brexit was voted, he, flew like a thief, and he doesn't want to talk about Brexit again. And on the other hand, they thought that the British people say if the referendum is to be put again today, majority of the British people will vote against the Brexit. And now that all this was fake news. Nigel Farage is still here. The British people still majority in favor of the Brexit.
True. That's absolutely not true.
Exactly
British people are not majority in favor of Brexit.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. These election results.
How do you explain that the Nigel Farage party arrived at least 2? He gathered almost 2 times the number of voters than the Labour Party.
Because the Labour Party is not anti-Brexit.
Or even the Conservatives.
No, listen.
Yeah.
The other way of looking at it, this is that the Nigel Farage's Brexit party simply took all the votes of UKIP, his former party, the explicitly pro-Remain
and part of the Conservative parties.
The explicitly pro-Remain parties, right? So that's the Liberal Democrats, Change, the new pro-Remain party, the SNP, the Welsh, the Greens. Between them, collected almost exactly the same number of votes as the pro-Brexit party. The 2 central parties, the Conservatives and the Labour Party, both suffered because of their ambiguity on Brexit, essentially. The voters who voted for Brexit didn't feel that they could vote for the Conservative Party because it wasn't delivering it, and voters who voted to remain couldn't vote for the Labour Party because they didn't think that the Labour Party actually supported remain. So
Can we agree on the fact that British people decided to Brexit?
In
2016.
Yes, by 37% of the British electorate voted to leave.
Exactly the same percentage of Maastricht in 1992. And nobody is asking to revote Maastricht again. Why, when it is against Europe, you ask for revote, and when it is in favor of Europe, you say, you applaud and you say, okay, this is the majority of people voted.
No, I'm just saying...
There is a problem here.
No, all I'm saying is that the British electorate is still almost precisely split.
Yeah, but as the French electorate also. But nobody contests when the vote is in favor of Europe. Nobody contests it.
This is the question, isn't it? That in the UK, turnout was 35%, not huge, but it was up on what it was in 2014. If you add the number of seats, I'm looking now at numbers of seats here, you'll see that 37 Remainers to 33 Brexiters have been elected. Yeah. It's a swing of 10 seats.
It is intellectually dishonest to claim that this election result in Britain is a vote for a hard Brexit.
But you agree that it is inconclusive, and it's been 3 years, and it's still inconclusive.
It was obvious, and it was a bad decision. When Theresa May said, give me by 3rd of June, we should have given by the 3rd of June. Donald Tusk and Angela Merkel made a huge mistake, and Emmanuel Macron was right, because they want to give to UK even 1 year. They want to remain in this uncertainty until March 2020. And it was only thanks to the action of Macron we decided by the 31st October. Why it is a mistake? It's a huge political mistake, because we cannot allow the anti-European forces say, hey, you don't respect the democratic will of the people when you don't like the result. And this is exactly what Euro has been doing in the past. So I do believe that UK Brexit must happen by the 31st October. As pro-European, the friend of UK, I hope that in the future there will be a majority who will ask, after the general election, to rejoin. That would be the way of respecting the democratic will of the people, not to keep UK in this limbo, in this uncertainty for 3 years, and after 3 years nothing has changed, because the UK is deeply divided. But majority needs only one vote more.
He's very motivated to become European Parliament.
That is sure. But I was saying this before.
Monica Frassoni, do you agree?
Well, I actually see that the main problem of Brexit is in the UK, and notably in the Conservative and in the Labour. And that is something that has to be very clearly stated, because also Labour Party is extremely responsible for the situation in which we are in. And the point is that the pro-European parties are extremely clear on what they want, and this is something that has to be somehow respected. But I also believe that we should not allow this Brexit undecisiveness to get to weaken the European Union as such. So I believe that there must be a decision by the 31st of October, but differently from Sandro Gozzi, I believe that the possibility of having a second referendum is something that should be kept in the landscape.
Yeah, but there won't be.
Because
Monica, even Jeremy Corbyn today has said that there won't be a second referendum before the 31st of October. So this idea of waiting for Godot, it is bad for Europe, because I do believe that we need to think about what we have to do to reform Europe, not what we have to do to get out Westminster from the limbo where Westminster has put itself. That's the problem. So it is clear that if there was a clear will to having a second referendum to remain, I would be the first one to be happy.
Monica Frassoni.
I'm sorry, but I did not interrupt you when you were speaking, so thank you for not interrupting me. So what I am saying simply is that indeed we should not linger on and on and on and on, but we also have to take into account that the fact for the UK to get out is just without any kind of agreement is not good for the UK and is not good for us. And I believe that the question of the second referendum, whatever Jeremy Corbyn says, will have to come back on the agenda if there is no agreement for the 31st of October. So that is the only thing I'm saying, and I think that the pro-European front is also very strong in the UK and also has to be respected. Having said that, we cannot go on much longer for the simple reason that this is getting also at the stability and on the capacity of reforming of the European Union.
Just one final point on this, because it goes beyond just Brexit. I guess the verb of the day after last night's vote is equivocate. The people on the left in the UK are fuming mad at Jeremy Corbyn for
Sitting on the fence. Sitting on the fence. He's sat on the fence on Brexit. If Labour had come out as an actively, explicitly pro-Remain party,
right,
it would have been right up there.
The way politics is done, the way politics is done across the EU in 2019. The lesson here is that you have to be clear in your message.
You have to
more than before.
Yes, you have to stand up for what you believe in and not try and triangulate. Basically, you can't try and keep everybody happy.
All right, let's talk about Spain for a second. The socialists there are scoring a win, converting the try from last month's snap general election, garnering nearly a third of the vote, while the conservatives there lost ground. Now, though, with the election of two high-profile Catalan separatists, the exiled Carles Puigdemont, the jailed Oriol Junqueras, is Brussels about to be drawn into a fight?
With these votes, we will send a political prisoner, Oriol Junqueras, to the heart of Europe, and we will push back the Spanish state's repression. I can tell Oriol Junqueras, Brussels and the European Parliament are waiting for you.
Are you waiting for Oriol Junqueras?
No, not at all. And I'm relieved that after all, they didn't get this huge result that they were expecting. And there are two good news from Spain. The first is that the pro-European Socialist Party got a very good result. The second, that Ciudadanos, which is a pro-European forces, has also increased by, I think, 6 or 7 the seats compared to the last European elections. And I think that these are two very good news which come.
So should he take up his seat? Should Oriol Junqueras be allowed to sit in the European Parliament?
It is not to me to go into. I mean, I don't have an explicit position to say about this. I only think that the message which comes from Spain is positive beyond the Catalan issue, and the Catalan issue must be solved by Spaniards in Spain, not by Europe talking about Spain.
I think there's one other interesting point to make in Spain, which is also a pattern that we've seen across Europe in recent elections, which is that parties of the centre-right, which try to co-opt or outflank parties of the far right, are being heavily punished at the polls. We've seen that very clearly in Spain. We've seen it in the way that Salvini completely swallowed Forza Italia. Yeah. We've seen it in the way that the National Rally has completely destroyed. Macron. I mean, it was Macron's initiative, but the National Rally has eaten, the Les Républicains vote in France. It's a pattern. If you and Jean-Marie Le Pen, Marine's father, said it first and best. He said, "Why would you vote for the copy when you can vote for the original?" And that's a pattern that is very clear across Europe and was very clear again in Spain yesterday.
This is, the recomposition of the European political scene we are witnessing for now 2 or 3 years. Before, we have the right party and the left party. Those are the parties who govern the nations of Europe and also, of course, Europe itself through the European institutions. 2 years ago, there is a changement in the model that govern the nations and that govern Europe. We have now the comeback of the frontiers, the comeback of the identities, the comeback for the political voluntarism. All those features are now in power in many countries throughout the world and even in Europe. So, as I said, we are witnessing a process. It's a dynamic. Of course, it is not from one day to another that all Europe will change, but it is exactly what happened back in the 80s. Back in the 80s, when we were at that time, in the early 80s, when we were, in a state-driven world, and we changed to a market-free model with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan and all this new model take place in the world. It arrives also in 10 years, you know. Today we are initiating a new model, this page of free market, no border, free movement of people throughout the world is now closing in many countries, and people are asking for protections, are asking for borders. That does not mean we ask for close ourselves and live in autarky.
They're also asking for more of a European identity. When you see the Austrian far right got punished because of its party leaders trying to curry favors from what he thought was a Kremlin insider in that sting operation video,
you know,
do you say to yourself that maybe also this vote is bad news for both Trump and Putin?
I think this will not change the fact of the political movement we are witnessing today. This is Piccadilly, you know, it's concerning the political local life of Austria. By the way, I'm answering also to your question. I do not believe there is a European democracy.
I know you don't.
As such, because because there is no European people.
Of course.
You are Italian. I am French.
Yeah, there are only more than 400 million people who just voted for European Parliament, but there is no people and no democracy.
There is no democracy in Europe because there is no European people. European people is you write that in plural. We are French people, Italian people, German people.
Doesn't change anything for democracy.
You cannot melt all those identities and create a fictive
you see the fact
European
that we don't want to melt anybody.
Yeah, this is your project. The European federalism
for a European democracy, you don't need one single people, and you need to merge peoples.
Yes.
You can have different peoples that exercise their right to vote a European Parliament, which is unique in the world. But of course, you want to dissolve the European Parliament. Your party has been elected, but you would like to suppress the European Parliament. So, I mean, the point is that you are saying this just the day after there has been an increase in the turnout of the European voters, and we have lived a very good exercise of European democracy. You know what is the problem? No, let me finish and then I listen.
Yeah, but
the problem is not Demos. The problem is Kratos. The problem is not that we don't have the peoples with an S. The problem is that we should give more power to Europe to handle to provide security.
You give power to a technocracy that will never.
Let me bring in
European democracy.
Let me bring in Monica.
If I can only ask you one question.
Let me bring in Monica Frassoni.
If the European model was a good idea, why does this model did not been imitated in the rest of the world?
It is only
you
without
are always
democracy.
Europe to the rest of the world, except for this.
Can I answer to you? It is imitated.
Where?
Only. There is a free market in North America.
Where? No.
There is a free market.
I'm asking about the European institutions. The European construction.
There are institutions in the African Union. You know the difference between us and the other form of regional cooperation, that they do not have a democracy. We have a democracy.
And
they don't have a European Parliament. We have a Parliament.
Is killing the national
they don't elect their representative.
Let me bring in
the European democracy is killing the national democracy.
This is the big difference.
All right, it's Monica Frassoni. Here we are at a time when we have the superpowers who are battling, the U.S. and China over trade, most notably. These elections, do they bolster Europe's standing?
Well, it depends on the majority that will govern Europe. I believe that the issue here is that the so-called new model that the gentleman was talking about is not new at all. It was actually, let's say, set up already in the 30s, and with nationalism, with the frontiers, with peoples, with identity, and the result was war. That is the result of bringing that logic to the end. And I think that what we have to do now is to answer to the worry of the people and to make sure that those who are afraid of their future, because they have the right to be protected, are presented with fundamentally different policies that go in the direction of changing, indeed, the situation by confronting certain challenges like climate change, the redistribution, the tax policies, etc. But all of this can only be done with a strong and democratic Europe.
Right,
so under that point of view, there is no solution. There is no solution in new frontiers, but there can be things that are done differently from today. And let me just say one single
Very
word,
briefly, because we're out of time,
concerning the extreme right parties. In this moment, yes, most of those parties, even the Lega who won today the elections, are confronted with very heavy issues of bad spending, of corruption, of very strange, behaviors under the point of view of managing of the power, which have to do with giving Europe in the hands of China and Russia. And this is another reason why we should make sure that both nationally and at European level we have a completely different majority.
For sure, the governing parties were very competent budgetary and monetary through the past 40 years.
Jean Messiha, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Monica Frassoni for being with us from Brussels, John Henley, Sandro Gozzi. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, Francois. So much to say on this. Not enough time, I guess, to cover all of the different angles across all of the European newspapers around all of the themes emerging. EU vote confirms French far right as Macron's main opposition. I suppose that's one of the main points of observation emerging from. But also the strong showing of the Green Party, even here in France, with 13%. And what they're saying here is the strong showing of the far right isn't necessarily going to change Emmanuel Macron's direction in terms of policy, but actually the strong showing of the Green Party could in fact force Emmanuel Macron's government to take into account the extent to which environmental issues are at the heart of the electorate's concern. This is at least analysis from Angélique Chrysafis in The Guardian. She says Macron's high-profile environment minister quit in fury last year, saying the president was not doing enough on the climate issue. The large turnout of young voters for the Green Party could push the government to step up its domestic response on the climate emergency. That's analysis coming back in other articles too. This in the Daily Beast. Young voters out to save the world might just save Europe from the populist madness. And so that is, I suppose, one theme that is certainly coming through European elections. Green Party surge as Green Wave hits the EU. Also, the fact that the traditional left-wing and right-wing parties have been in collapse mode. That's not a new trend, but certainly was confirmed in these European elections. Christophe Guilly here speaking also to The Guardian, saying the traditional left-right divide is giving way to one that reflects a fundamental class conflict that will define the West in the 21st century. The working classes whose livelihoods have been hollowed out by globalization, pitted against those socio-economic groups who have benefited from it. Other points of analysis, this one from Le Monde, talking about how the focus on, I suppose, issues that create anxiety, such as the migration crisis, actually kind of took the focus away from two main issues that are affecting European voters. The intra-European exodus, countries that have seen, for example, Italy, Spain, where you have these from countries like Romania as well, migrating towards Germany and the UK.
Going where the jobs are.
Right, exactly. So countries, 12% of Bulgarians, 7% of Polish population have left to work in another European country. And these are issues that weren't really present much in the discussion, which tended to follow the populist versus pro-European integration sort of axes of debate, if you like. This is a map in Le Monde showing as well, as I was saying, the collapse of the traditional parties. Red is where the party has hemorrhaged results or votes since the last
This is the Socialist
election.
Party.
That's the Socialist Party. You can
Which
see
finished on what, 6-point-something%?
6.3%, and for the Conservative Les Républicains, it was 8.4%. And you can see that's their map of quote-unquote hemorrhaging. It just so happens that red is the colour they chose for the loss of votes. And you can see then other parties, green, indicating that the other end of the spectrum where parties, La France Insoumise, doing a little bit stronger there as well. But certainly that is a clear theme coming through that was also reflected in the UK. I'll just finish with this. The Liberal Democrats have won more seats in the European Parliament than Labour and the Conservative Party put together. Anyone who would have predicted this a year ago would have been laughed off Twitter.
All right, James Creedon, many thanks. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.